The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the dusty town of Copper Creek, as Delilah Jameson stared numbly at the wooden cross marking her father's fresh grave. Her white wedding dress, forced upon her that very morning, now bore the stains of dirt and tears as she collapsed to her knees in the cemetery, her future as bleak as the approaching dusk. Arizona Territory, 1875. A time when men ruled with iron fists and women had precious few choices. Delilah had just turned 19 when her world crumbled beneath her feet. Her father, Thomas Jameson, had been the town's most respected physician until consumption claimed him 3 days prior, leaving behind nothing but debts and a daughter with no prospects. Mayor Franklin Wilcox had offered a solution that very day: marriage to his son, Harold. The arrangement would settle her father's debts and provide her with security, or so the mayor claimed. What he didn't mention was his son's reputation for cruelty and drunkenness. The ceremony had been performed that morning, despite her tearful protests, with half the town bearing witness to her shame. "I cannot be his wife," she whispered to her father's grave, her slender fingers digging into the freshly turned earth. "I would rather die." The sound of approaching footsteps caused her to still, though she did not turn. The cemetery was on the outskirts of town, and visitors were rare, especially as dusk approached. Delilah tensed, fearing Harold had come to claim his reluctant bride. "Madam," a deep voice said from behind her. "Don't mean to intrude on your grieving." Delilah turned, blinking away tears to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he stepped closer, she could make out the features of a man she'd never seen before, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years under the unforgiving western sun. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip seemed more a tool than a threat. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler than his appearance suggested. "Does it look as though I am all right, sir?" Delilah replied, her voice breaking. "I have buried my father and been married against my will all in the same week." The stranger removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair. To her surprise, he knelt beside her in the dirt, his eyes on the crude wooden cross. "My condolences for your father," he said, then bowed his head in silent prayer. Delilah watched, bewildered, as this unknown cowboy prayed beside her in silence. There was something oddly comforting about his presence, though she couldn't explain why. When he finished, he raised his head and introduced himself. "Ethan Xavier, I just rode into town looking for work." "Delilah Jameson," she replied automatically, then corrected herself bitterly. "Delilah Wilcox now, I suppose, though I never consented to the name." Ethan's expression darkened. "Forced marriages aren't uncommon out here, but that doesn't make them right." A shout from the direction of town made Delilah flinch. "Harold," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "He's coming for me." Without hesitation, Ethan rose to his feet, offering his hand. "Do you want to go with him, madam?" Delilah looked up at the stranger, weighing her options in an instant. "No," she said firmly, "I do not." "Then we'd best be leaving," Ethan replied, helping her to her feet. "My horse is tied just beyond those trees. You would help me, you don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. No woman should be crying at her father's grave in a wedding dress she never wanted to wear. They moved quickly through the cemetery toward the line of cottonwoods at its edge. Delilah's heart pounded in her chest as she heard Harold's voice growing closer, calling her name with increasing irritation. Ethan's horse, a sturdy Palomino gelding, nickered softly as they approached. "Can you ride?" Ethan asked, untying the reins. "Yes," Delilah nodded. Her father had insisted she learn, despite the town's disapproval of such unladylike behavior. With surprising agility for a woman in a wedding dress, Delilah mounted behind Ethan. As they rode away from Copper Creek, she felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had just abandoned her husband on their wedding day, a scandal that would echo through the territory for years to come. Yet for the first time since her father fell ill, she felt as though she could breathe again. Night fell across the desert as they rode, the stars emerging one by one in the vast Arizona sky. Delilah clung to Ethan's waist, uncertain of their destination but certain she could not return. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice nearly lost in the rhythm of hoofbeats. I've got a friend who owns a ranch about 2 days' ride from here, Ethan replied. We'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next. You're risking a great deal for a stranger, Mr. Xavier. Ethan was silent for a moment before responding. Let's just say I've seen what happens to women trapped in unwanted marriages. My mother was one of them. They rode until the moon was high overhead, finally stopping beside a small creek to rest. Ethan helped Delilah dismount, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. We should rest here for a few hours, he said, leading his horse to water. I don't think they'll follow us in the dark, but we'll need to be moving by first light. Delilah nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The emotional strain of the day had drained her completely. She sank down beside a boulder, arranging her ruined wedding dress around her. Here, Ethan said, offering her his canteen and a piece of jerky from his saddlebag. It's not much, but it'll keep your strength up. Thank you, she murmured, accepting both. The water was warm but welcome on her parched throat. As she ate, she studied her rescuer more carefully in the moonlight. Ethan Xavier was perhaps 30, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold secrets. A scar ran along his jawline, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way that Harold Wilcox was, but there was something compelling about his face, a steadiness that inspired trust. Why were you in the cemetery? She asked suddenly. Ethan looked up from where he was unsaddling his horse. I pay my respects whenever I come to a new town, he said simply. Tells you a lot about a place, how they treat their dead. And what did Copper Creek tell you? That it's like most frontier towns, struggling but surviving. He paused. I didn't expect to find a bride in mourning. Delilah's hand went unconsciously to the simple gold band Harold had forced onto her finger that morning. She twisted it off and held it in her palm, contemplating its significance. I'm not sure what I am anymore, she admitted. Not a proper wife, certainly. Perhaps not even a respectable woman running off like this. Respectability is overrated, Ethan remarked, settling his saddle as a makeshift pillow against the boulder. Get some rest, Miss Jameson. Tomorrow will be a long day. You still call me Jameson, she noted. That's who you are, isn't it? Delilah closed her fingers around the wedding ring, then deliberately tossed it into the creek. The tiny splash was oddly satisfying. Yes, she said firmly, I am Delilah Jameson. For the first time that day, she smiled. Dawn arrived with a chill that penetrated Delilah's thin wedding dress. She woke with Ethan's coat draped over her, the owner himself already up and preparing coffee over a small, nearly smokeless fire. We should reach Johnson's trading post by midday, he said, handing her a tin cup of the strong brew. Might be able to find you some proper clothes there. Delilah accepted the coffee gratefully, cradling the warm cup in her cold fingers. I have no money, she admitted. Everything I owned was left behind. I've got enough to get you what you need, Ethan replied. We'll sort out the rest later. They rode out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, the desert coming alive with color. Delilah found herself studying the landscape with new eyes, not as an obstacle, but as a possible refuge. The vast openness that had once seemed intimidating now felt like freedom. By mid-morning, the heat had become oppressive. Delilah's wedding dress, designed for a spring ceremony, offered little protection from the sun. Her fair skin was turning pink despite the bonnet she'd fashioned from a torn piece of her petticoat. There, Ethan said eventually, pointing to a cluster of buildings shimmering in the distance. Johnson's. The trading post consisted of a general store, a small livery stable, and what appeared to be a rudimentary hotel. A few wagons were gathered in front, and the sound of a blacksmith's hammer rang through the clear air. They approached cautiously, Ethan scanning the surroundings for any sign of pursuit from Copper Creek. Satisfied they weren't in immediate danger, he helped Delilah dismount in the shade of the store's awning. Wait here, he instructed. I'll see what they have inside. Delilah nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. Her once pristine wedding dress was now filthy, torn in places, and hopelessly wrinkled. Her hair, which had been elaborately arranged for the ceremony, had come loose during the ride and now hung in tangled waves around her face. A woman emerged from the hotel across the way, pausing when she spotted Delilah. With a curious expression, she approached, her practical calico dress and apron marking her as the proprietress. "Well now," she said, looking Delilah up and down, "don't often see a bride at Johnson's. Especially one looking like she's been dragged behind a horse." Delilah straightened, attempting to maintain what dignity she could. "It's a long story, madam," the woman's weathered face softened. "Ain't they all? Name's Martha Johnson. That's my husband's store you're standing in front of, and that's our hotel behind me." "Delilah Jameson," she replied, deliberately using her maiden name. "Running from something, I'd wager," Martha said, not unkindly, "or someone." Before Delilah could respond, Ethan emerged from the store carrying a bundle of clothing. "Mrs. Johnson," he greeted with a nod. "Ethan, Xavier, I was hoping your establishment might have a room where Miss Jameson could change and rest a while." Martha raised an eyebrow at the miss but didn't comment on it. $2 a night includes supper and breakfast, just for a few hours," Ethan clarified. "We need to be moving on." "Still $1, Martha replied firmly. "Running costs money." Ethan handed over the coin without argument, then passed the bundle of clothing to Delilah. "There's a dress, undergarments, and some riding clothes," he explained. "Nothing fancy but practical." "Thank you," Delilah said, touched by his thoughtfulness. Martha led her to a small but clean room in the hotel. "Wash basin's full," she said, pointing to a corner. "Take your time, girl. I'll keep an eye on your friend." Once alone, Delilah peeled off the ruined wedding dress with a sense of profound relief. She washed quickly, using the cold water to rinse away the dust and sweat of their journey. The simple cotton dress Ethan had purchased was a dull brown, several sizes too large, but felt like the finest silk compared to the wedding gown. After braiding her hair and securing it under a plain bonnet, she examined herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman who looked back at her seemed different, somehow older, perhaps, or simply changed by circumstances. When she emerged, she found Ethan and Martha deep in conversation on the hotel's narrow porch. They fell silent as she approached. "Much improved," Martha commented, "though we ought to take in that dress a bit." "There's no time," Ethan said, rising. "I've just heard that riders from Copper Creek were asking questions in Silverdale yesterday. That's too close for comfort." Delilah's heart sank. "Harold won't give up easily. His pride won't allow it." "Pride's a powerful motivator," Martha agreed, "especially wounded pride." She disappeared into the hotel, returning moments later with a small bundle. "Food for the trail," she explained, handing it to Ethan. "And this," she pressed something into Delilah's hand, "is just in case." Delilah looked down to see a small Derringer pistol. "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Martha interrupted firmly. "A woman alone needs protection. My Henry taught me to shoot the first week we were married, and it saved my life more than once." "Thank you," Delilah said, carefully tucking the weapon into the pocket of her new dress. They left Johnson's trading post before noon, heading northeast toward the mountains. Ethan had traded his tired Palomino for a fresh bay gelding, and a second horse for Delilah, a gentle mare with a smooth gait. "Where exactly are we going?" Delilah asked as they rode side by side across the open plain. "A place called Pine Creek Ranch," Ethan replied. "Owned by an old friend of mine, Samuel Cooper. He and his wife Bess will take us in until we figure out our next move." "And what might that be? I can't run forever, Mr. Xavier." Ethan considered her words before answering. "First, I think you can call me Ethan after all we've been through. Second, you're right, running isn't a permanent solution, but we need time to consider your options safely." "My options seem limited," Delilah observed. "A woman alone in the territories has few paths available to her." "You're not alone," Ethan said simply. The statement hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. They made camp that night in a sheltered ravine, far from any established trail. After a simple meal of beans and jerky, they sat beside a small fire, the silence comfortable between them. "Tell me about your father," Ethan said eventually. Delilah smiled, memories warming her more than the fire. He was a good man, came west when I was just a child after my mother died. He believed the dry air would be better for his patients with lung ailments. She traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. He treated everyone equally, prospectors, ranchers, even the Apache when they would allow it. A rare quality, Ethan observed. Yes. The town respected him for his skills, though they sometimes found his views progressive. She looked up. He taught me to read medical texts to assist with simple procedures. He believed women should be educated even in the West. And your mother, what do you remember of her? Very little. She was beautiful according to my father, and kind. She died of fever when I was 5. Delilah paused. What of your family? You mentioned your mother. Ethan's expression grew distant. My mother was from Boston, educated, refined. She married my father because she believed in adventure and romance. What she got was isolation on a failing ranch and a husband who grew bitter with every failed crop. I'm sorry, Delilah said softly. She died when I was 12. My father followed 3 years later. He prodded the fire with a stick. I've been on my own since then, working cattle drives, breaking horses, whatever honest work I could find. Is that what brought you to Copper Creek? Work? Ethan hesitated before answering. Partially. I also had information that a man I've been searching for might be there. What man? The one responsible for this, he said, touching the scar along his jawline. We have unfinished business. Delilah sensed there was more to the story, but Ethan's tone discouraged further questions. Instead, she asked, how far to Pine Creek Ranch? Another day's ride if the weather holds. He glanced at the sky. We should get some rest. I'll take first watch. Delilah arranged her bedroll near the fire, acutely aware of her unusual circumstances. 2 nights ago, she had slept in her childhood bed for the last time. Last night, she had slept on the ground with a stranger. Tonight, she did so again, yet Ethan no longer felt like a stranger. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard him moving quietly around their camp, securing the horses, checking their surroundings. Despite the danger of their situation, she felt safer than she had in the weeks since her father fell ill. Morning brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a cool wind carried the scent of rain. They packed quickly, eager to reach Pine Creek Ranch before the storm hit. The mountains can be treacherous in wet weather, Ethan explained as they mounted. Washes fill quickly and trails wash out without warning. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By early afternoon, they began to climb into the foothills, leaving the desert behind. Pine forests replaced scrub brush, and the air grew cooler with each mile of elevation gained. The first raindrops fell as they crested a ridge overlooking a green valley below. In the distance, Delilah could make out buildings nestled among tall pines, a large main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Pine Creek Ranch, Ethan announced, pointing. Samuel's place. They urged their horses forward, but the trail had already begun to turn muddy with the rain. The mare Delilah rode slipped once, nearly throwing her, but recovered quickly. Careful, Ethan cautioned. We'll take it slow from here. The rain intensified, becoming a steady downpour that soaked through their clothing. Visibility decreased as clouds settled low on the mountainside, and thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. They had nearly reached the valley floor when disaster struck. A flash of lightning, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder, spooked Delilah's mare. The horse reared, pawing at the air with flailing hooves. Delilah, unprepared for the sudden movement, lost her seat and tumbled backward off the horse. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her right ankle as it twisted beneath her. The mare bolted down the trail, disappearing into the rain and mist. Delilah, Ethan was beside her in an instant, dismounting in a fluid motion. Are you hurt? She tried to stand but collapsed when she put weight on her injured ankle. My ankle, she gasped through clenched teeth. I think it may be broken. Ethan gently examined the injury, his touch firm but careful. Sprained, I think, not broken. But you can't walk on it, and we're still a mile from the ranch. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms and placed her on his horse. Hold tight to the saddle horn, he instructed, then took the reins and began leading the horse through the mud. The journey was slow and miserable. Rain streamed down their faces, and the trail grew increasingly treacherous. Ethan walked steadily forward, one hand on the reins, the other occasionally reaching up to steady Delilah when the horse stumbled. "Not much farther," he encouraged as they finally entered the valley proper. "Samuel will have a warm fire and dry clothes waiting." Delilah nodded, too cold and in too much pain to respond verbally. Her ankle throbbed relentlessly, and her soaked dress clung to her like a second skin. At last, the main house came into view through the curtain of rain. It was larger than Delilah had expected, a two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch spanning the front. A figure appeared in the doorway, peering out into the storm. Upon spotting them, the man rushed forward, calling over his shoulder as he did so. "Ethan, by God, is that you?" "Samuel," Ethan called back, "need some help here?" Samuel Cooper was a barrel-chested man with a thick beard streaked with gray. He reached them quickly, taking in the situation at a glance. "What happened?" he asked, helping Delilah down from the horse. "Spooked horse, bad fall," Ethan explained tersely. "Her ankle's injured." A woman appeared on the porch, tall and angular, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Bring her inside, quickly," she directed. "I've got the fire going and water heating." Between them, Samuel and Ethan carried Delilah into the house, setting her gently in a chair near the blazing fireplace. The warmth was immediate and welcome, seeping into her chilled bones. "I'm Bess Cooper," the woman said, kneeling to examine Delilah's ankle. "And you are?" "Delilah Jameson," she replied through chattering teeth. Bess looked up at Ethan with a raised eyebrow. "This isn't the kind of trouble you usually bring to our door, Ethan Xavier." "It's a long story," he said, removing his dripping hat. "One best told after we're all dry and warm." "Fair enough," Samuel agreed, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Come on, there are dry clothes in the spare room. Bess will take care of the young lady." Once the men had gone, Bess helped Delilah out of her wet dress and into a clean nightgown. She wrapped the injured ankle tightly with strips of cloth, then settled Delilah in a guest room on the ground floor, her foot elevated on pillows. "The swelling's bad, but I don't think it's broken," Bess said, adjusting the blankets. "Still, you won't be walking on it for at least a week." "A week?" Delilah's dismay was evident. "We can't stay that long, we're being pursued." Bess's expression remained calm, but her eyes sharpened with interest. "Are you now? Well, that's a story I'll be wanting to hear, but first rest. No one will find you in this weather, and our ranch is well off the main trails." Delilah wanted to protest, but found her eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion overtook her. The last thing she remembered was Bess placing a cool cloth on her forehead as rain pattered against the window. She woke hours later to the sound of men's voices. Night had fallen, and a lamp burned low beside her bed. Her ankle throbbed dully, but the sharp pain had subsided to a manageable ache. The voices came from the next room, Ethan and Samuel deep in conversation. Delilah couldn't make out all the words, but phrases drifted through the partially open door. "Not what I expected when you said you were heading to Copper Creek," Samuel was saying. "Wasn't my intention," Ethan replied, "but I couldn't leave her there." "And Wilcox?" "You're sure it was Harold Wilcox she was forced to marry?" "That's what she said." "Why, do you know him?" There was a pause before Samuel answered. "By reputation only. His father's got political ambitions beyond being mayor of a backwater town. There are rumors he's involved with land speculation, particularly around the proposed railroad routes, which would explain the sudden interest in marrying off his son to a penniless doctor's daughter," Ethan mused. "Dr. Jameson might have owned land valuable to the railroad." Delilah frowned, considering this new perspective. Her father had owned their modest house in town and a small parcel of land outside Copper Creek land. He'd often spoken of building a proper clinic on someday. Could that be what Mayor Wilcox wanted? The door creaked open and Bess entered carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of stew. She smiled when she saw Delilah awake. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "How's the ankle feeling?" "Better, thank you," Delilah replied, struggling to sit up. Though still quite painful, that's to be expected. Bess helped her arrange the pillows behind her back. The men are discussing your situation. Ethan told us what happened in Copper Creek. Did he also tell you that I'm essentially a fugitive, that I abandoned my husband on our wedding day? Bess's mouth quirked in a half-smile. He did. Can't say I blame you. From what I've heard of Harold Wilcox, a woman should have some say in who she marries. My father would have agreed with you, Delilah said, accepting the bowl of stew. He always taught me to think for myself, even when it wasn't fashionable for women to do so. Sounds like a wise man. Bess sat on the edge of the bed. Samuel and I have been married 30 years. He's never once tried to make decisions for me or treated me as less than his equal partner in this ranch. Delilah took a spoonful of the rich stew, savoring the warm comfort it provided. You're fortunate. Such marriages seem rare in my experience. Rarer than they should be, Bess agreed, but not impossible to find. She patted Delilah's hand. Eat up now, you'll need your strength for whatever comes next. Over the next few days, Delilah's ankle improved enough that she could move around the house with the aid of a crutch Samuel fashioned for her. The forced inactivity gave her time to think about her situation and to get to know her hosts better. Pine Creek Ranch was larger than she'd initially realized, nearly 10,000 acres of grazing land, forest, and streams. Samuel had started with almost nothing 30 years earlier, building it into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Hard work and good luck, he modestly explained when she commented on his achievements, and having Bess beside me every step of the way. Ethan, meanwhile, made himself useful around the ranch, helping with repairs to buildings damaged in the recent storm. Delilah often watched from the porch as he worked alongside Samuel's ranch hands, his movements efficient and purposeful. On the fourth day of their stay, Delilah found herself alone with Ethan for the first time since their arrival. Samuel and Bess had gone to check on a herd in the north pasture, leaving them to mind the house. Delilah sat on the porch, her injured ankle propped on a stool, attempting to mend a tear in one of the dresses Bess had lent her. Ethan joined her, settling into a chair nearby. Samuel thinks you should be safe here, he said after a comfortable silence. Harold Wilcox has no reason to look for you this far north. Perhaps, Delilah conceded, setting aside her sewing, but I can't impose on the Coopers' hospitality indefinitely. And there's the matter of the marriage itself legally. I'm still bound to Harold, regardless of how I feel about it. There are ways to address that, Ethan replied carefully. Samuel knows a judge in Prescott who might help, especially if we can prove the marriage was coerced. And how would we prove such a thing? It would be my word against the mayor's. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Delilah, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned earlier. She tensed at his serious tone. What is it? I didn't come to Copper Creek by chance. I was looking for someone, a man named Victor Hargrove. He's a lawyer who works for the Territorial Land Office, investigating fraud related to railroad land acquisitions. Delilah's brow furrowed in confusion. I don't understand. What does that have to do with me, your father's land? Ethan explained. It sits directly in the path of the proposed Southern Pacific route. Mayor Wilcox has been buying up properties along that corridor for months, sometimes using questionable methods. Hargrove believes your father refused to sell, which is why Wilcox arranged the marriage to his son. To gain control of the land through marriage, Delilah finished, the pieces falling into place. That's why the wedding was so rushed after my father died. They didn't even wait for a proper mourning period. Ethan nodded grimly. Hargrove had been tracking Wilcox's activities for some time. I was supposed to meet him in Copper Creek, but he never arrived. When I saw you at the cemetery, I had no idea who you were. I only knew you needed help. So you weren't just being chivalrous, Delilah said, a hint of disappointment in her voice. You were investigating the Wilcox family. At first, Ethan admitted, but once I understood your situation, helping you became more important than my assignment. Delilah absorbed this new information slowly. What happened to this Mr. Hargrove? Why didn't he meet you as planned? Ethan's expression darkened. I don't know for certain, but given what I know about Wilcox and his associates, I fear the worst. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. If Wilcox was willing to eliminate a federal investigator, what might he do to recover a runaway bride and valuable property? "I need to know everything, Ethan," Delilah said firmly. "No more partial truths. If I'm in danger, I deserve to understand why." Ethan nodded, acknowledging the justice of her demand. For the next hour, he explained his role as an agent for the Territorial Marshal's office, investigating land fraud connected to the expanding railroads. Mayor Wilcox was suspected of numerous illegal activities, including forging deeds, intimidating landowners, and possibly worse. "Your father's land is particularly valuable because it includes water rights to Silver Creek," he concluded. "The railroad needs that water for its operations." "So my father may have been murdered," Delilah said quietly, her hands trembling slightly. "Not taken by consumption as everyone believed." Ethan reached out, covering her hand with his own. "I don't know that for certain, but the timing is suspicious." Delilah stared out across the valley, processing everything she'd learned. After a long silence, she turned back to Ethan, her jaw set with determination. "I want justice," she said simply. "For my father and for myself. What do we do?" Before Ethan could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Samuel and Bess were returning, but they weren't alone. A third rider accompanied them, a man in a dusty black suit who rode as though he wasn't accustomed to the saddle. "Trouble," Ethan muttered, rising to his feet. The riders reached the house and Samuel dismounted first, his expression grim. "Ethan, Delilah, this is Judge William Patterson from Prescott. He brings news." The judge, a thin man with spectacles and a serious demeanor, dismounted stiffly. "Mr. Xavier," he said with a nod, "and you must be Mrs. Wilcox." "I prefer Miss Jameson," Delilah replied coolly. "Understandable given the circumstances," the judge conceded. "I'm afraid I bring unsettling news. Harold Wilcox has filed charges against Mr. Xavier for kidnapping and against you, madam, for abandonment. There's a warrant for your arrest in 3 counties. Delilah felt the blood drain from her face. "They can't seriously believe what they believe is irrelevant," the judge interrupted. "What matters is that Mayor Wilcox has considerable influence with certain territorial officials. The charges are serious enough that I felt obligated to warn you personally rather than sending an official notice." "Why would you risk that?" Ethan asked suspiciously. Judge Patterson removed his spectacles, cleaning them methodically with a handkerchief before responding. "Because Victor Hargrove was a friend of mine. His body was found 3 days ago in a ravine outside Copper Creek. The official report calls it an accident, but Victor was an experienced rider who knew that country well." A heavy silence followed this announcement. Bess was the first to speak. "You'd better come inside, Judge. This conversation shouldn't be had on the porch where anyone might hear." They gathered around the kitchen table, where Bess served coffee while the judge elaborated on the situation. Harold Wilcox, humiliated by Delilah's departure, had organized a search party. When they failed to find any trace of the newlyweds, Harold had convinced his father to file formal charges. "The marshals aren't actively searching yet," Judge Patterson explained, "but it's only a matter of time, and I'm afraid there's more." "Of course there is," Samuel muttered, refilling his coffee cup. "Mayor Wilcox has filed a claim to Dr. Jameson's property, citing his son's marriage to the doctor's sole heir. The Territorial Land Office is reviewing the claim, but without evidence of coercion in the marriage, they're likely to approve it." Delilah's hands clenched into fists. "They cannot give my father's land to that man." "I won't allow it." The judge regarded her with sympathetic eyes. "You have limited legal options, Miss Jameson. As a married woman, you have no standing to contest the claim without your husband's consent." "Then what am I to do? Return to a man I despise?" "Allow him to profit from my father's death." "There may be another way," Ethan interjected. "Judge, if we could prove that Mayor Wilcox was involved in illegal land acquisitions, possibly including murder, would that invalidate his claim to Dr. Jameson's property?" Judge Patterson considered this. "Potentially, yes, but you'd need substantial evidence, documents, witnesses willing to testify, and you'd have to present this evidence before the land transfer is finalized, which could be as soon as next month. I have some of what we need, Ethan said. Hargrove shared certain documents with me before he disappeared, but the most compelling evidence would be in Wilcox's own records. Samuel leaned forward. You're not suggesting breaking into the mayor's office? That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Ethan confirmed. It's the only way to get what we need in time. It's too dangerous, Bess objected. If you're caught, you'll hang for sure. Delilah, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Not if we're smart about it. All eyes turned to her in surprise. My father was the town physician for 15 years. I know every building in Copper Creek, including the mayor's office. I know when it's occupied and when it isn't, and I know where Mayor Wilcox keeps his most important documents. How could you possibly know that? The judge asked. Because I helped my father treat the mayor's gout last winter, Delilah explained. I was in his office 3 times a week for a month, applying hot compresses while my father adjusted his medications. The mayor continued working during treatments, signing papers, reviewing documents, locking especially important ones in a safe behind the portrait of his wife. A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. Do you think you could open that safe? I know I could, Delilah replied confidently. The combination is his wife's birthday. He mentioned it to my father once, complaining that he'd chosen it because it was the one date he couldn't afford to forget. The judge cleared his throat. I feel obligated to point out that what you're discussing is highly illegal. So is forcing a woman to marry against her will, Delilah countered. So is murdering a federal investigator. Sometimes justice requires extraordinary measures, Your Honor. Judge Patterson sighed, removing his spectacles again. I didn't hear any of this conversation. In fact, I was never here. He rose from the table. I should return to Prescott before my absence is noted. Whatever you decide to do, you have 1 week at most before the marshals begin actively searching for you. After the judge departed, the 4 remaining adults discussed their options late into the night. Samuel and Bess, though concerned for their friend's safety, ultimately agreed to help. The plan is simple, Ethan concluded as midnight approached. We return to Copper Creek. While the town is at Sunday services, Delilah and I enter the mayor's office through the rear window. We locate and copy any incriminating documents, then leave town before anyone realizes we were there. And if something goes wrong, Bess asked, the worry evident in her voice. Samuel will be waiting with fresh horses at Miller's Creek, just outside town, Ethan replied. If we don't arrive by sunset, he'll know we've been captured and can alert Judge Patterson. Delilah, who had been quiet during much of the planning, finally spoke. There's one more thing we need to consider, the church. What about it? Samuel asked. Before we leave Copper Creek, I want to visit St. Michael's, the small church on the edge of town. There's a wooden cross there, erected in memory of my mother. I need to say goodbye properly. Her voice softened. I was there when they forced me to marry Harold, crying beneath that cross while they prepared the ceremony inside. It seems fitting to end this chapter of my life in the same place. Ethan studied her face, noting the determination behind her request. It's risky, he said gently. The church will be full on Sunday. Not in the early morning before services begin, Delilah countered. Please, Ethan, it's important to me. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. We'll make it work. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparations. Delilah's ankle continued to improve, though she still walked with a slight limp. Bess altered a set of men's clothing to fit her, reasoning that Delilah would be less recognizable dressed as a young man. Ethan spent hours reviewing maps of Copper Creek with Samuel, planning approach routes and escape paths. He also cleaned and checked his revolver multiple times, a detail that didn't escape Delilah's notice. You expect trouble? She asked the night before their departure, finding him on the porch staring at the stars. I always expect trouble, he replied honestly. That way I'm rarely disappointed. Delilah settled beside him, drawing her shawl tighter against the evening chill. I've been thinking about what happens after if we succeed in clearing my name and saving my father's land. What have you decided? I'm not entirely sure, she admitted. I could sell the property, use the money to start fresh somewhere else. Maybe even study medicine properly, as my father always wanted. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. You'd make a fine doctor. And what about you? Will you continue working for the marshal's office? He was quiet for a long moment before answering. I've been doing this work for 5 years. Chasing land frauds, tracking criminals across the territory. I told myself it was about justice, but sometimes I wonder if I've just been running from something. What would that be? Ethan turned to face her, his expression unusually vulnerable in the moonlight. A normal life, roots. The things most men take for granted. And now, Delilah asked softly, now I'm not so sure that's what I want to run from anymore. He reached out, tentatively touching her hand. Delilah, when this is over, the door opened behind them, interrupting whatever he had been about to say. Samuel appeared carrying a lantern. You two should get some rest, he advised. We leave at first light. They departed Pine Creek Ranch before dawn, traveling light and fast. Samuel and Ethan rode ahead, while Delilah followed on a gentle mare carefully selected for her still tender ankle. Dressed in boy's clothing with her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, she bore little resemblance to the wedding-gowned woman who had fled Copper Creek 2 weeks earlier. They traveled cross-country, avoiding main roads and settlements, camping in sheltered ravines and wooded hollows. By the second night, they had covered nearly 60 miles, putting them within a day's ride of their destination. As they sat around a small, smokeless fire that evening, Samuel outlined the final details of their plan. I'll wait at Miller's Creek with the horses. If you're not back by sunset, I'll assume something's gone wrong and ride for Prescott to alert Judge Patterson. We should be in and out of the mayor's office within an hour, Ethan said, studying the rough map he'd drawn in the dirt. The church visit will take less time. Delilah nodded, her expression resolute. We'll enter town before sunrise when most people are still asleep. The church first, then the mayor's office while everyone's at Sunday services. And if you encounter Harold Wilcox, Samuel asked, we avoid him at all costs, Ethan replied firmly. This isn't about confrontation, it's about gathering evidence. We'll let the law deal with him once we have what we need. Delilah said nothing, but her hand unconsciously moved to the pocket where Martha Johnson's derringer rested. The thought of facing Harold again filled her with dread, but also with a steely determination she hadn't known she possessed before her forced marriage. They reached the outskirts of Copper Creek in the gray light before dawn. Samuel separated from them at the agreed-upon location, while Ethan and Delilah continued toward town, St. Michael's Church stood on a small rise at the eastern edge of Copper Creek, its simple wooden steeple silhouetted against the lightening sky. A small cemetery stretched behind it, where generations of settlers rested beneath weathered markers. They approached cautiously, leaving their horses tied in a grove of cottonwoods a short distance away. The church appeared deserted, though a single lantern burned in the rectory window. Father Matthews rises early to prepare for Sunday services, Delilah whispered as they crept toward the cemetery, but he rarely leaves the rectory before breakfast. The cemetery was peaceful in the early morning light, dew glistening on the grass between the graves. Delilah moved unerringly toward a wooden cross near the eastern wall, kneeling before it despite the dampness of the ground. The cross was simple but beautifully crafted, bearing a small brass plaque with the inscription, Delilah Jameson, beloved wife and mother, 1832-1860. Until we meet again. Ethan stood a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands as Delilah bowed her head in prayer. The moment felt intensely private, and he found himself offering his own silent prayer for Delilah Jameson, for her husband now joined with her in death, and for the daughter who knelt before him with such quiet dignity. After several minutes, Delilah rose and approached another grave nearby her father's, still marked by the simple wooden cross she had been crying beneath when Ethan first found her. I'm going to make this right, Father, she whispered, touching the cross gently. I promise you. As she stepped back, the sound of the church door opening caused both of them to freeze. Father Matthews, a slight man with silver hair, emerged with a prayer book in his hand. Who's there? He called, peering into the cemetery, "Show yourself." Delilah glanced at Ethan, panic evident in her eyes. If they fled now, they would certainly be seen. If they remained, they risked recognition. Making a swift decision, Ethan stepped forward. "Just paying our respects, Father," he said, keeping his voice low and his hat pulled down. "My young brother wanted to visit our aunt's grave before we continued our journey." The priest squinted in their direction, clearly suspicious. "At this hour, the cemetery isn't usually visited until after services." "We're just passing through," Ethan explained. Headed north to Prescott by midday. Father Matthews took a step closer, his gaze sharpening as he studied Delilah's disguised figure. "Your brother seems familiar somehow. Have you visited St. Michael's before, young man?" Delilah kept her head down, mumbling something unintelligible. Ethan placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "He's shy around strangers, Father, and we really should be going." The priest's expression remained doubtful, but he nodded slowly. "Very well, go with God, travelers." They walked quickly away from the cemetery, fighting the urge to run until they were safely out of the priest's sight. Once back among the cottonwoods, Delilah leaned against a tree, her heart pounding. "That was too close," she gasped. "I think he recognized me." "Even if he did, we'll be long gone before he can alert anyone," Ethan assured her. "Are you ready for the next part?" Delilah straightened, squaring her shoulders. "Yes, let's finish this." They left the horses hidden and approached the town on foot, keeping to back alleys and shadows. Sunday morning in Copper Creek was quiet, with most businesses closed and many residents preparing for church services. The mayor's office occupied the second floor of a brick building on the main street, above the town's only bank. A narrow alley ran behind it, providing access to a rear staircase used by cleaning staff and deliverymen. "There," Delilah whispered, pointing to a window near the staircase. "That's the window to the mayor's private office. It's usually left open in summer for ventilation." They waited until the street was momentarily empty, then slipped into the alley. Ethan went first, testing the staircase for creaking boards before motioning Delilah to follow. The window was indeed open, the lace curtain inside billowing gently in the morning breeze. Ethan peered cautiously through the gap, confirming the room was empty, then carefully pushed the window wider and climbed through. Delilah followed, wincing as her injured ankle protested the awkward movement. Once inside, they stood still, listening for any sound in the building. Satisfied they were alone, they moved quickly to the large portrait of Mrs. Wilcox hanging behind the mayor's desk. "Help me lift this," Ethan whispered. Together, they carefully removed the heavy portrait, revealing a small wall safe. Delilah stepped forward, turning the dial with confident movements. "June 15, 1830, she murmured. 861530. The safe clicked open, revealing stacks of documents inside. Ethan quickly sorted through them while Delilah kept watch at the door. "Land deeds, correspondence with the railroad company, bank drafts," he muttered, scanning each paper rapidly. "Here, this is what we need." He extracted several documents, spreading them on the mayor's desk. "These are forged deeds for properties along the railroad route. And this," he held up a letter with obvious excitement, "is correspondence with someone named Blackwell about removing obstacles to the land acquisitions, including specific mention of your father." Delilah's breath caught. "Does it say they killed him?" "Not explicitly. But it mentions accelerating his condition to force a decision about the property." Ethan's expression hardened. "They might have poisoned him, Delilah, made his illness worse deliberately." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Can you copy what we need?" Ethan nodded, removing a small notebook and pencil from his coat. He worked quickly, transcribing key passages and signatures while Delilah continued to monitor the hallway outside. "Church services will be starting soon," she warned after several minutes had passed. "We need to hurry." Ethan finished his work, carefully replacing the documents in the safe exactly as they had found them. They rehung the portrait, ensuring it was straight, then moved toward the window. The sound of voices in the alley below stopped them cold. Through the curtain, they could see two men standing at the bottom of the rear staircase, one in a deputy's uniform, the other unmistakably Harold Wilcox. Father Matthews said he saw suspicious strangers in the cemetery this morning, Harold was saying. A man and what he thought might be a woman dressed as a boy. He said she reminded him of Delilah. You think she's come back? The deputy asked skeptically. I know my wife, Harold replied, his voice hardening. She's stubborn and foolish enough to try something like this. Check the cemetery again and I'll search my father's office. She might be looking for something to use against us. Footsteps on the staircase indicated Harold was coming up. Ethan pulled Delilah away from the window, looking frantically around the room for an alternative exit or hiding place. The closet, Delilah whispered, pointing to a narrow door in the corner. They squeezed inside just as the office door opened. Through a small crack they could see Harold enter, his face flushed with anger. He went straight to the portrait, checking that the safe was secure, then began systematically searching the room. Delilah pressed back against the wall of the closet, accidentally knocking a broom that clattered to the floor. Harold's head snapped up at the sound, his eyes narrowing. Who's there? He demanded, drawing a pistol from his coat. Come out now. Ethan pushed Delilah behind him, reaching for his own weapon as the closet door was wrenched open. Harold's face contorted with rage as he recognized them. You, he spat, leveling his pistol at Ethan's chest. I knew you'd come back. Both of you? Lower your weapon, Wilcox, Ethan said calmly. We don't want trouble. Too late for that, Harold snarled. You stole my wife, humiliated my family. Did you really think you'd get away with it? I was never your wife in any true sense, Delilah said, stepping out from behind Ethan. The marriage was forced upon me while I was grieving, and now we know why so your father could steal my father's land for the railroad. Harold's expression flickered with surprise before hardening again. You know nothing. We know everything, Ethan countered. About the forged deeds, the threats, what happened to Victor Hargrove, even how your father may have hastened Dr. Jameson's death. Lies, Harold hissed, though uncertainty crept into his voice. You have no proof. We have enough, Ethan replied. Judge Patterson is already reviewing evidence we provided earlier. What we found today will complete the case against your father and against you as an accomplice. Harold's hand trembled slightly, causing the pistol to waver. You're bluffing. We're leaving now, Ethan said, slowly moving forward. You can either shoot us adding murder to your crimes, or you can let us go and perhaps save yourself by testifying against your father. For a tense moment, it seemed Harold might actually pull the trigger. Then from the street below came the sound of church bells. Harold's resolve visibly weakened. This isn't over, he said, lowering the pistol slightly. My father has powerful friends. You'll never be safe. Perhaps, Delilah acknowledged. But neither will you once the territorial authorities understand what happened here. Your father killed a federal investigator, Harold. Do you really want to hang for his crimes? Confusion and fear warred in Harold's expression. Taking advantage of his hesitation, Ethan suddenly lunged forward, knocking the pistol aside and pinning Harold against the wall. Delilah, go, he commanded, struggling to subdue the younger man. Get to Samuel at Miller's Creek. I'll be right behind you. Delilah hesitated only briefly before climbing through the window and descending the rear stairs as quickly as her injured ankle would allow. Once in the alley, she ran toward the edge of town, keeping to the shadows. Behind her, she heard a gunshot from the mayor's office, then silence. Her heart seized with fear for Ethan, but she forced herself to continue toward Miller's Creek, knowing it was what he would want her to do. She reached the meeting point, breathless and terrified, to find Samuel waiting anxiously with the horses. Where's Ethan? He demanded, helping her onto her mare. Still at the mayor's office, she gasped. There was a struggle, a gunshot. Samuel's face paled, but his voice remained steady. We'll wait 10 minutes. If he doesn't come, I'll go back for him. Those 10 minutes were the longest of Delilah's life. She stared down the trail toward town, praying for a glimpse of Ethan's familiar figure. As the minutes ticked by, her hope began to fade. I'm going, Samuel said finally, checking his revolver. You stay here with the horses. Before he could mount, however, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider appeared on the trail, not Ethan, but Father Matthews on an ancient gray mare. The priest reined in when he saw them, his expression grave. "Miss Jameson," he said, acknowledging her despite her disguise. "I thought I might find you here." "Father Matthews," she replied cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you," he said simply. "There's been a shooting at the mayor's office." "Your friend, Ethan," she breathed, fear clutching at her heart. "Is he?" "He's alive," the priest assured her quickly. "But wounded. Harold Wilcox is dead," Samuel cursed under his breath. "What happened?" From what I could gather, they struggled for Wilcox's gun. "It discharged, killing him instantly." Father Matthews shook his head sadly. "Your friend managed to escape in the confusion, but he was bleeding badly. He asked me to bring you this," he handed Delilah a blood-stained notebook, "and to tell you to ride for Prescott immediately. Don't wait for him." Delilah clutched the notebook, recognizing it as the one containing Ethan's copies of the incriminating documents. "Where is he now? We can't leave him." "He insisted," Father Matthews said firmly. "The mayor is organizing a search party. If you stay, you'll all be captured." "He's right," Samuel said, though it clearly pained him to admit it. "We need to get those documents to Judge Patterson. It's what Ethan would want." Delilah felt tears streaming down her face. "I can't leave him, not like this." Father Matthews reached out, touching her arm gently. "He asked me to tell you something else. He said to meet him where it all began, beneath the cross." Understanding dawned in Delilah's eyes. "St. Michael's, the cross in the cemetery," the priest nodded. "I'll do what I can for him medically. If he's able to travel by tomorrow night, I'll bring him to the church. If not—" He trailed off, not needing to complete the grim thought. Samuel helped Delilah onto her horse. "We ride for Prescott now," he said with finality. "Judge Patterson will send marshals back for Ethan." With a heavy heart, Delilah turned her mare toward the north. The evidence that would clear her name and bring justice for her father was safely in her possession, but the cost seemed unbearably high. They rode hard through the day and into the night, stopping only to rest the horses. By dawn the following morning, they reached Prescott, proceeding directly to Judge Patterson's residence. The judge received them immediately, his eyebrows rising at Delilah's male attire, but making no comment on it. He reviewed the evidence they'd gathered, his expression growing increasingly grave. "This is more than sufficient to issue warrants for Mayor Wilcox and several of his associates," he confirmed, "but the matter of Harold Wilcox's death complicates things." "It was self-defense," Delilah insisted. "Harold would have killed both of us." "I believe you," the judge assured her, "but we'll need Mr. Xavier's testimony to confirm it. In the meantime, I can declare your marriage invalid on grounds of coercion, especially given the evidence of the Wilcox family's illegal activities." "Thank you," Delilah said, relief washing over her. "But what about Ethan? He's injured, possibly hiding in Copper Creek. We need to help him." Judge Patterson nodded, already writing orders. "I'll send 2 deputy marshals with you. They'll have authority to protect Mr. Xavier and arrest anyone who interferes." By that afternoon, Delilah was riding south again, accompanied by Samuel and 2 grim-faced deputy marshals. They traveled through the night, reaching the outskirts of Copper Creek shortly after dawn. St. Michael's Church stood peaceful in the early morning light, much as it had 2 days earlier when Delilah and Ethan had visited. The cemetery was empty save for a solitary figure kneeling beside Delilah Jameson's cross. Delilah's heart leaped as she recognized Ethan, then plummeted as she saw the bandage wrapped around his left shoulder, stained with blood. She dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, rushing toward him. He looked up at her approach, a tired smile spreading across his face. "You came back," he said simply. "Of course I came back," she replied, kneeling beside him. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I hoped you would," he admitted. "Though I would have understood if you'd stayed safely away." Delilah examined his wound with professional efficiency, relieved to find it was a clean through and through that had missed any vital structures. "Father Matthews did a good job treating this," she commented, "but you've lost a lot of blood." "Worth it," Ethan said, nodding toward the notebook she still carried. "Did you get the evidence to Judge Patterson?" "Yes, he's issued warrants for Mayor Wilcox and his associates, and he's declared my marriage invalid." She smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "It's over, Ethan. We won." Samuel and the deputy marshals approached, having secured the horses. "Glad to see you in one piece, Xavier," Samuel said gruffly, though his relief was evident. Think you can ride, with help, Ethan replied, allowing them to assist him to his feet. He swayed slightly, leaning on Delilah for support. Where are we going? Back to Prescott first, one of the deputies explained. Judge Patterson wants your formal statement, then you're free to go wherever you please. Ethan looked down at Delilah, still supporting him despite her own lingering limp. And where might that be, Miss Jameson? I was thinking Pine Creek Ranch might be a good place to recuperate, she suggested, her cheeks coloring slightly. If the Coopers wouldn't mind having guests for a while longer. I think that could be arranged, Samuel said with a knowing smile. Bess would have my hide if I didn't bring you both back. As they helped Ethan toward the horses, he paused, looking back at the wooden cross where he had waited for Delilah. Seems fitting, he murmured. It's where everything began. The forced bride cried beneath the cross. The cowboy prayed beside her in silence, Delilah recited softly. Who could have known where that moment would lead? I had an inkling, Ethan admitted, his eyes warm as they met hers. Even then, I think I knew you'd change my life. 6 months later, Pine Creek Ranch hosted a small but joyous wedding. Beneath an arch of autumn flowers, Delilah Jameson and Ethan Xavier exchanged vows before a gathering of friends Samuel and Bess Cooper. Judge Patterson, Father Matthews, who had traveled from Copper Creek for the occasion, and even Martha Johnson from the trading post. Delilah wore a simple dress of pale blue silk, her hair adorned with wildflowers rather than the elaborate arrangement of her first, forced wedding. Ethan stood tall beside her, fully recovered from his wound, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their promises. After the ceremony, as guests enjoyed Bess's legendary cooking and Samuel's finest whiskey, Ethan led Delilah away from the celebration toward a quiet corner of the ranch. There, on a gentle rise overlooking the valley, stood a simple wooden cross similar to the one that had marked Delilah Jameson's grave. What's this? Delilah asked, touching the smooth wood. A memorial, Ethan explained, for your parents. I thought you might want a place to visit them, to talk to them. Samuel helped me make it. Tears filled Delilah's eyes as she read the inscription. Thomas and Delilah Jameson, beloved parents whose daughter carries their legacy of courage and compassion. It's perfect, she whispered, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Thank you. They stood in silence for a moment, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land that was now their home. Ethan had resigned from the marshal's service, choosing instead to help Samuel run Pine Creek Ranch. Delilah had used her inheritance, the proceeds from selling her father's land to the railroad at a fair price. Once Mayor Wilcox's schemes had been exposed to establish a small clinic on the ranch property, where she treated the cowboys and neighboring settlers. You ever regret it? Ethan asked suddenly. Leaving that day, all that followed, Delilah considered the question seriously before answering. I regret that lives were lost. I regret that my father suffered, but I can never regret the path that led me to you. She reached up, touching the scar along his jawline. Even with all the pain, I would choose this life 1,000 times over. Ethan drew her into his arms, his voice husky with emotion. When I found you crying beneath that cross, I thought I was simply helping a woman in distress. I never imagined I was finding my future. God works in mysterious ways, Delilah said with a smile. Father Matthews would say it was divine providence. And what do you say, Mrs. Xavier? I say we made our own destiny, one brave choice at a time. She stood on tiptoe, pressing her lips to his in a tender kiss. And I say we're just beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cross in golden light, they walked hand in hand back toward the celebration, back toward the future they had fought so hard to claim. Behind them, the wooden cross stood as a testament not only to what they had lost, but to what they had found in each other. Strength, healing, and a love born in the most unlikely of circumstances. For the forced bride who had cried beneath the cross and the cowboy who had prayed beside her in silence, their journey had come full circle. From desperate escape to triumphant return, from strangers united by circumstance to partners bound by love, Their story would be told for generations to come a testament to courage in the face of injustice and the transformative power of compassion. And as they rejoined their friends beneath the stars of an Arizona night, both Delilah and Ethan knew with certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, no longer forced, no longer silent, but freely choosing each day to build a life worthy of the sacrifice that had brought them to this moment.